Hello and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to discuss my recent job search, the company I'm working at, and kind of a bunch of tips I can give you to have success in your application process if you are a new grad or someone with not a lot of years of experience. So to start off, so I got a job at Blend Labs. I got an offer, I think, like last week, or actually, I think it was 2 weeks ago. And I actually start this week. And so I got hired in at IC2 level, and I'm not going to talk about my exact comp. I don't think it's like good to do that, but yeah, essentially I will say that I got hired in at IC2 level for a full stack engineer role. Yeah, and so I'm going to talk about a lot of things that I did to help me. So for one thing, I will say that for this role, I got a referral. So if you do know people that can refer you to companies you want to work at, that is going to help. I did get a little bit of referrals. But I also had a ton of interviews at the end of like March. So even if I didn't get this role, like it was pretty much a certainty that I was gonna find a job, within the next like month or two or something, because I was getting a ton of traction recently and a ton of interviews and things are going like pretty well. And I also had a Microsoft onsite that they actually didn't end up scheduling it yet. Like they kept telling me they're gonna schedule it, but I made it to like the onsite round for a mid-level role and so on. So I'll talk about that as well. And I'll briefly talk about my interview process at Blend, just because, yeah. So the first interview was an interview with the hiring manager, and it was scheduled to be an hour, and it ended up going 2 hours because it went really well. So we just talked about like what they do there, and then like what I'd be doing, and then we did like a algo problem, which was like pretty easy because I did a lot of code, so that helped with that. And basically, right at the end of that, they said like, yeah. We can just do the final round immediately, like next week. And I was like, sure. And so the final round was actually 3.5 hours with a half-hour break. And the first interview was like a leak code problem, pretty standard one. I'm not going to talk about exactly which one, but if you've done leak codes, it's pretty easy. So easy to medium-ish, with a couple follow-ups that were also, pretty easy. Then there was a 2-hour round of, so that consisted of coding. And the first interview was building. I don't know if I want to talk about exactly what, but let's just say building a feature in Node from like a server that they give you. So they have a pre-built server with a database and all that stuff, and they ask you to add a little bit more stuff. And that was actually kind of a disaster for me because my VS Code settings had like conflicting styling with what they had. So I think I put on like double quotes and semicolons at the end of my stuff, and they wanted single quotes and no semicolons. So what actually ended up happening was when I saved, my whole code base turned red because all my files or everything I saved would just be conflicting with what they wanted, so I couldn't really compile anything. So even though that went kind of badly, though, I still actually did what they wanted me to do. I just couldn't like test any of it, but I did it all, and I talked about like what I would do. And then with some issues that I had, they asked me like, how would you fix that? And I talked about all of that. So even though like I couldn't test any of it, it's still, I was still able to talk about my thought process. And it is kind of like worst case scenario around, or imagine you have an hour interview and like right away there's just like a huge issue, it's kind of a disaster. So yeah, like let's say, you have some interview in Python and you don't have Python installed or something or whatever, or you can't open something in Python for like 10 minutes and you're like, how do you handle that? So definitely kind of tough. And then the next interview was an 1 hour interview, write a TypeScript function to do something that's like a real world problem. So not like a leak code, but more of like, here's kind of like what we'd be running into, write a function to do this. And so I didn't end up finishing it, but I finished most of it, and I talked about how I would finish like the rest of it. So it went pretty well. And then I had a behavioral interview, and because I didn't have too much experience, they mostly just asked like, like, why are you looking for this role? Would you be a good fit and things like that. They didn't ask me too many like star questions. I think they did say that, if I was more experienced, they'd ask me to talk about all of things at my last role, like in depth. But because I wasn't super experienced, I didn't have to do any of that. And then I got an offer the day after, so it went pretty well. So I will talk about a lot of the things that I did do, though, and how I got a lot of interviews. So I started interviewing in October, and from October to December, I actually had 2 interviews, and it was 2 interviews with startups, and they were both a disaster. And it's because my basically whole approach to how to get interviews and interviewing was completely wrong, in my opinion. So what I tried to do is I tried to find companies that were a good fit for me. I basically didn't work on my resume at all. I tried to research companies, do like a CV on them, and so on and so on and so on. And the reality is in this market, your interview rates, I mean, depending on who you are, you can tell me like how it's going for you. But your interview rates, if you don't have a crazy good resume, are going to be very low. So because interview rates are low, you don't really want to focus on researching companies and things like that until you're actually like in, final rounds or like those things, right? Like until you're actually getting interviews. You more want to apply more instead of wasting time doing that. Because let's say you get like a 2% interview percentage with a company. If you research it, you might bump it up to like 4, but you spend an hour and make a generalized or personalized CV, message people at the company, all these things. So there's just like not a good return on investment there. And so I'm going to show you a lot of things that I did that I would recommend. So first thing on LinkedIn, so you can just search SWE. You can search something more personalized. You can search up like SWE in Python or whatever you want. And then basically what I honestly didn't know that, like, even though you look at these jobs and you see that there's a lot of applicants, I was like, yeah, I feel like easy applies don't actually work. You don't actually get interviews. Companies are just using this to get a huge applicant pool, and then they're not actually going to interview me. But the problem is I didn't do enough of them. So towards the end of my job search, I started doing roughly 50 easy applies a day, and that basically helps a lot. So it's really fast to do an easy apply. Like to most jobs, what I would do is you do an easy apply. So let's say I apply like here, put in phone number, and resume, and like they'll ask you whatever, let's say like one, sure, and then you just blah blah blah, and then you're done. So that took like 20 seconds. And then there are jobs with easy applies that will actually ask you to fill in a bunch of stuff, and then I was like, well, they're trying to get me to fill in like a workday role with an easy apply, and I'm just going to skip all those. So try to find like 50 jobs that you have roughly credentials for. Even if you're missing some stuff, I would apply. Like obviously don't apply some crazy stuff, like filter out like staff and principal and all that stuff, but I would still apply to like mid-level and senior, because I've seen plenty of people get mid-level and senior with not a lot of experience at small companies. Obviously, yeah, if you apply to like senior at Google, you're not going to get the job, but like if you apply to senior at some small company, that can totally happen, and I've seen it happen way more than you think. So don't only apply to junior roles, because junior roles are going to be the most polluted, and they're going to have the most competition, because there's just a ton of new grads from really good colleges, that are competing with you for those roles. Where mid-level, there's less people applying for those. So yeah, so anyway, search SWE, use easy apply, and then the other thing I did personally is I would put in like last 24 hours, and then every day, and then maybe I'd filter by like remote in a little bit, and then every day I'd have like 300 or so, and out of those 300 I'd pick like 50 to apply to. And so every day you have like 50 roles to apply there on LinkedIn. You can also get like inbounds and things like that, but that's one thing I did that gave me a lot of interviews. So easy apply is not a scam. You actually do get interviews, and the return on investment is very good, because it takes you like 20 seconds to do it, as opposed to researching a company, doing all these other things, and then maybe your interview percentage will go up like 3 or 4%, which is not worth it time-wise. Another site that I found that was good is Wellfound. And so Wellfound is exclusively... Oh, by the way, so on LinkedIn, when you search, I would filter out... you can filter these out from the searches, but there's a lot of like JoeBot and like all Insight Global. I'd filter most of these recruiting companies out. So like you're going to see a lot of these, like especially I think if I do past 24 hours and I do like remote, I think there's a lot of it. Let's see. Yeah, so there's a lot of like these JoeBot, some other recruiting companies. So I would probably not apply to most of those. But there are still like plenty of good jobs. Obviously, the better jobs aren't on easy apply, but this will just give you like a ton of jobs to apply for. And even if you aren't super qualified, and even if you aren't super interested, you still get interview prep, and you also get a chance to test your resume, which is important. So yeah, another thing is Wellfound. And on Wellfound, it's basically a startup company, or it's a startup website, and it's actually pretty good. I only started applying the last month of my job search only for a couple weeks, and I got like 5 or more interviews with like not a lot of apps. So I would also recommend this. Pretty easy. You just put in your resume, you put in your profile, just like LinkedIn. And the nice thing about this is you can filter for, so I live in San Diego, so you can filter for San Diego. So essentially it'll filter for wherever you live plus remote. And you can filter by most recent. And the rates are, obviously it's like startups, so there are going to be a lot of pays that are really bad, but there's a lot of salaries that are really good as well, right? So you can see like a lot of these salaries are really good. And what I would recommend is, so look at the role, like let's say this role, and look if you have like somewhat, I mean, obviously if it's like ridiculous and you don't have any skills, I probably wouldn't apply. But if you have like some of the skills, then I would still apply. And then what I usually do is I usually apply to, usually they have like, they don't really have like junior or senior, they just have like engineer and senior. And then if they have engineer and senior, I would just apply to the regular engineer. And then if they don't have the regular one and only senior, then I would just apply to senior. I think that's probably the better way to do it, because I do think if you apply to a bunch of different levels at a company, then it makes it look like you're not really serious. But if there's only one, then you could be like, yeah, like maybe I'm not like the most qualified for this, but there wasn't a lower role, and whatever. And like basically make it the company's job to reject you, don't reject yourself. Because if you apply, like a lot of people are like, I don't want to apply, I'm underqualified, like they'll just say no, and then it doesn't matter. Like it's not like some permanent record thing against you, so it doesn't really matter at all. So you have to basically get the mindset of like, I'm just gonna apply to companies, and if they tell me no, that's fine, but I'm not gonna like reject myself. Okay, so yeah, so you go here, and the apps are pretty fast. So let's say I want to like go over here, and you look at, the other thing is they'll have like a lot of like, most of these companies, and this pretty much happens almost all the time, is they stretch the number of years they're looking for, and everyone stretches the number of years they've been working for. So it's kind of like a, everyone's kind of like faking it to a certain degree. And so even if they want 5 years and you have like a couple, it's still fine to apply. I had like, I'll give you an example. I had an interview at Bloomberg for a 5 years of experience role that I didn't have 5 years of experience, so, and that's Bloomberg. So obviously to a smaller company, you'd have higher chances of getting the interview. So even if you don't have like the years of experience, a lot of times they'll say this, but then you'll just say what you have and they'll be like, fine. And if they're not fine with it, then fine, but a lot of companies write like, you don't need to have all these things. So it's pretty easy to apply. A lot of these and they'll tell you like, if you're outside of the range, you can put in this thing. So I usually leave this blank unless they force you to do it. So sometimes they'll say like, sometimes they'll tell you like, oh, when you apply, you have to put in a CV, and then I just put a generic CV. So I say like, my name is blah, blah, blah. I did these things, and and then I just fill in like a line or two for their company, like read their company really quick and just fill in a line or two. So I'm not big on spending like 30 minutes or an hour researching the company with these current interview rates. I'd probably be a lot more interested in doing that for like my next role where I'm looking to make like a big jump. And then I'd also, if you're applying selectively at that point, right? Like you have a job, you're looking for your next step, and then you're a lot more selective, and then you could do a lot more research there. But if you're just applying for a job, I would not be super selective. And yeah, you could see all I have to do is click apply, hit send. There you go, pretty fast. And I did get a lot of interviews there. So the other one I would recommend is Auto. Auto is pretty good. So the same kind of thing. You put in your resume and all that stuff. And this one actually gives you like the highest quality of jobs. So let me see if I can. So basically what it does is it's like a AI thing. And it will try to find jobs for you. And most of these jobs are way better companies than LinkedIn. And B, also pay higher. And C, have a much better fit for you. So like all this will be closer to, like this is 4 years, but most of the jobs are like not a lot of years for me. Like a lot of the jobs I found for me have like no years at all. So yeah. So you could see like, let's see. I guess this doesn't really say years of experience, but yeah, because I said I don't have a lot of years experience, most of the roles here didn't have a lot of years experience. And then basically what you can do with this is, so they'll give you like 10 to 20. Once you start, they'll give you a lot, but then it kind of dries down, and then you just check back here every couple days, and you'll get another like 10 jobs to apply to. So this also gives you a lot. So Wellfound, you can probably do like 10 to 20 a day. LinkedIn, you could do 50 easy applies. Here you could do 10 to 20 a day, or not 10 to 20 a day, 10 every other day or something. And that'd give you, 70, 80 roles a day. And then you can quickly test your resume, right? So if you do 80 roles a day, 7 days a week, or whatever, let's say 5 days a week even, you get like 400 apps a day, 400 apps a week. And it sounds kind of nuts, but like you just really want to be getting your numbers up. And then if you notice, oh, okay, I'm getting a ton of interviews, like I'm getting way too many, then you can be more selective. But start out with a super wide scope, make sure your resume is good, and then as you start getting more and more and more stuff, then you can be more selective about like where you're applying to and all these things. And obviously, if you have a good job, you can be more selective and so on. So the nice thing also here that I would recommend is download Simplified Copilot. This is also useful. It's a Chrome extension. And what it allows you to do is you can apply on Auto or just any kind of LinkedIn company. So if I this works on all of these. So if I just type in like LinkedIn here, and there's some site like this, let's say. So I don't want an easy apply. So let's see if there is one that's not an easy apply. Okay, most of these are easy applies. Whatever. So I'll show you on Auto. So basically on Auto, you can just go to apply, and none of these are easy applies. They'll all have like a company site like this. And most of them have some kind of similar format. So here's one like this. They have like a couple, right? They have Greenhouse or some other ones. There's like 2 or 3 different kinds. So they're all the same. So you get Simplify Copilot, you put in your resume, you put on all your stuff, and now you don't actually have to fill this out. You just go, and it'll recognize like, hey, you're trying to apply. You just hit apply, and then it will actually just fill in all your stuff. There's like a couple things that might be missing, but you can fill those in. But for the most part, it'll fill in all your stuff. And also a lot of these forms have like list prior work experience, and it will actually just fill all that in. So that's like 5 minutes of time that you can just So with the bot, you can basically apply to a normal app in a minute instead of if you had to fill it all out, it'd be like 10 minutes. So it saves you a ton of time. And a lot of these companies also have like shorter. So I always apply on the website. A lot of these companies have like a pretty short application thing like this, right? So same thing. You just hit let's do it, and then it will fill in all your stuff. Not all of it, but most of it. And then you can get the rest of it in like 10 seconds. So that's the main thing, is try to get your apps done quickly. And then, let's say you want to do 50 apps on here. That takes honestly like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then you can do 20 apps on here. Same thing, 30 minutes. And then you can do 10 apps on here, like 10 minutes. So most of these roles, you don't really have to filter. Like you don't really have to look for, am I a good fit? Because they are already they are already giving you roles that match with your resume. So this one's a lot faster. So I just usually apply to all of them. Because most of them, like if you look like 2-year software engineering, back-end processing, front-end technologies, and so on and so on. So most of these are things that I wrote on my resume. And like I said, these are better companies. So yeah, so these are the main things I'd recommend. Also, if you do leak codes and you are interested in FANGs, what I would recommend is go to all the FANG sites and just apply. And then if you get rejected, so you can see I got rejected from a lot of these, just apply to some more stuff. And I applied to these later, or I applied to these like a while ago. But basically, keep your resume like in their system, and then it might just take them a while to actually reach out to you. So for example, I got a referral to Microsoft in January, and then I got an interview for a role in March. So it might take a while because they have a lot of people and so on. And so I was actually able to get to a Microsoft final round, which, like I said, they said they were going to schedule in the future, but because I have an offer now that I'm happy with, it's just not worth doing that one. Because the pay is similar, and the Microsoft mid-level, I'd have to move and all these other things. And it's also a solutions role instead of like a full stack developer. So I think I'd be a better fit for that one. But yeah, essentially always keep your like name in here. And I was able to get a Microsoft role. I was able to get a Google tech screen that I passed. And then they said they weren't hiring because that was like at the start of last year. And then I actually got a Meta interview, but then they ended up canceling it because the role was filled. So that's the other thing I would probably recommend is once you're comfortable with phone screens, try to get your phone screen scheduled ASAP. Because if you schedule it in a week because you're like, I want to study the company, the role might be filled. So just like maybe in the beginning, you can take your time studying. But after your while, like most phone screens are pretty similar. You just have to do enough of them to get used to it. To get used to talk about like where did I work, what am I looking for, blah 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 blah. Try to schedule them ASAP and get the process going ASAP, and then maybe if you're like on a Meta final round or something, then you could be like, yeah, let me take my time there because I want to study. And the other thing is, don't study for roles that you don't have an interview for yet. So let's say Meta gives you some kind of hacker rank, and they're like, hacker rank for new grads. We just want to see where you're at, and then maybe we'll give you an interview. Don't spend like 3 weeks studying for that because you're like, I really want to work at Meta, something like that. Because I had that for like a bunch of companies. I had that for like TikTok, JP Morgan, some other ones, where you basically do all this stuff, you study for all this stuff, and even if you do well, like on the TikTok, I actually got 100% on their like hacker rank. I got 100% on the JP Morgan. I got 100% on some other one. So let's say out of 5 things I did that I got 100% on, I got 1 interview. And that's just like a phone screen that I didn't end up going to a technical round on. So that the return on investment is totally not worth it there. You only want to be studying when you actually have interviews. So yeah, if you have like a tech screen with Meta, then I would study, or like a final round or whatever. But don't study for interviews that you don't have. So don't just like go to a bunch of places, take assessments, and then be like, I'm going to study for these assessments because it's my dream job, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, you could have spent that time applying to like 500 more jobs, or a lot more. And you can still apply to Meta and you can still take the assessment, just don't spend like 2 weeks studying. And same thing if you're applying to a job, like let's say you apply to a job and they want, like let's say we go to like some job here, and they want, let's see, there's not too much here, so let's look for a couple others. Let's see what they're looking for. Right, so let's say the company is like, we want Java, and Python or Node.js or whatever, and you're like, I really want this company, so I'm gonna go and like study Java. I'm gonna go take a course in Java. I'm gonna try to build like some app in Java. It's like, that's a total waste of time, because if they actually do interview you in that language, like for example, I had an interview, my second round interview at Bloomberg was like Python OOP, and I actually did a decent amount of Python, but I still didn't know a lot of the stuff that they asked. So if you get interviewed in Java like that, there's like no chance to pass if you only study it for a week. Like you're just not going to know, the internal stuff, because you're not going to use it long enough. So don't bother like studying the language. Just say like, yeah, look, I know Python. Maybe like you can. No, I wouldn't even say that. I would say like, I literally don't know Java. I know Python, and I'm capable of learning Java. And if that's what they're happy with, then fine. But if they're looking for someone who has 3 years Java experience, actually Java, and they're not willing to onboard you from another language, then just, it's like whatever. You just move on. So don't study too long for things you don't know, because you're not going to learn it in a week. There's kind of no point. And I did a take home for a company in like C++, which was a huge waste of time. It took me like a week to learn C++, and then like 3 days of doing it like 8 hours a day to do this thing. And I did pretty well, but not quite well, just because, like I said, you're not going to know all the internal stuff. You're not going to be able to do as well as someone who's been coding in C++ for years if you do it for a week. So yeah, so I'd recommend that. Another thing I would recommend is, if you're not getting interviews, this is super common. Don't be like, okay, I applied for a month, I'm not getting interviews. So instead, what I need to do is I need to be more qualified. So I'm just going to study a bunch of stuff for like months, and then I'll apply again with the same resume. If you're not getting interviews, it's almost always because your resume. So fix your resume. If you don't have any experience at all, try to find open source stuff to work on. So for example, I worked on open source stuff, and I got kind of lucky. So the extension that I worked on actually has like 14K downloads now. That's not everyone's going to get that, but try to find open source stuff to work on. You can try to find equity stuff to work on, just to have experience on your resume. You can also make, like, I know people that made an LLC. So you make an LLC, you make a startup, and then it doesn't even have to like work. You can just be like, yeah, we're working on an AI app. Here's like an LLC. Because what you don't want is like, I have no experience, no internships, and like projects that are like a to-do list. Like, that doesn't matter. So you want to have like meaningful experience on your resume, and if you don't have paid experience, then work on open source or things like that. Yes, that's most of that. And as far as so I wanted to show like how to improve on your resume. So what I show how to improve on your resume, the best tool is Resume Worded, and it's basically an ATS system that grades your resume. So I have an example here. So you can basically just go and upload your resume. And then when you upload your resume, it'll tell you, do you want mid-level? Do you want senior level? Do you want entry level? I usually write mid-level. Like I said, depends on the company. And then you put in your resume, and then it will tell you all the issues with it. So for example, this is like some fake one. So if we look at some things, let's see, impact or brevity or something. So they have some bullet issues, impact, so like repetition. You could see like, oh, okay, so I use build in like every single line. So a lot of these things that you write can easily be cleared with that. They'll also tell you like a bunch of other things. So basically, try to like do this, and then I think you can probably spend like 2 to 3 hours and get your resume from like a 50 score to like an 80 score. And that's actually like way more meaningful than studying for a long time. Like, you want to get your resume to a good state, because if your resume, like I've seen this a lot, people study a lot and then they never work on their resume. They put in their resume into an ATS and it's like a 40. And it's like, well, yeah, it doesn't matter how much you study. Like your resume just gets auto rejected from everywhere. So who cares? And so what I would recommend is like use this. You can get pro. I think it's like $50. You can share it with people. Try to get your score up into like the mid 80s. Like I would say at least to like an 80. And then start applying. And then if it doesn't work, then like fix it again and so on. And that's the other thing. You want to try to have a friend group if you can of people that are roughly in your same spot. So I have like a few people that I know that were like kind of in the same spot. And then that way you can share all your interview experience between each other. So if you get 3 interviews, each one of them gets 3 interviews. Now you have way more data way faster. And they might be good at some things and I might be good at others. So for example, I was friends with someone who was very good at doing the recruiter calls and like networking, but I was good at like the technical stuff. So you can kind of like combine that stuff together and get better results. So I'll just show you an example. Basically, I guess I can even upload mine. So I can upload mine really quick. So if I change, and if I do, here we go. And so when I started, I think my score was like a 60, and then I got it up to like in the 90s. And then the other thing is they want a lot of impact. So what you notice right away is you want a lot of numbers. But the problem is if you have too many numbers, then it's kind of like you have to justify all those numbers, and that's kind of hard. So you could see like impact, they show like where you have impact, but they want a lot more numbers. So I put in a ton of numbers. I got my score up into the 90s, but then I was like, I can't defend most of these points, so I just got rid of a lot of them. So try to add numbers as much as you can. And also you can kind of like learn how to, because with an ATS, like they just look for numbers. So it's very easy to add a lot of numbers in areas you can defend that aren't actually super impactful, but they'll help you pass an ATS. So what a lot of people did, for example, is like, they came from another career and they said, oh, I have like 10 years of experience in software and some other thing. So an ATS interprets that as 10 years of experience. A real person can obviously tell it's not, which is fine, but you're getting past like you're getting your actually eyes on your resume, which is good. So the impact is the big one, is like most people don't have any numbers at all, and then the score will be really low, and then this will be all really low. But essentially use this, get your score up into like 80 or 90. Also try to have your resume like, as you can see, it's like pretty legible, pretty easy to read, pretty like good to look at in my opinion. And so that helps a lot as well. So use this, and then your process should basically be fix your resume, apply to roles, and then if you're like try to apply to roles, like get in a lot of numbers, apply for 1 to 2 weeks. If you're getting no traction at all, then like fix your resume again. Then, if you're getting traction, then you can start working on, okay, how do I pass recruiter screens? Like, what am I doing wrong and things like that. Maybe do a bunch of like mock screens with people, because you might be saying things that are like red flaggy that you might not notice by saying it yourself. So just do like mocks with people that helps a lot as well. Then once you're on like tech screens and stuff, study for that and so on. And so the nice thing with this process is you can actually study a lot. So because with the apps, like roughly, let's say every day you apply here, you do like 30 minutes of apps on easy applies, apply here, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, right? You spend about an hour applying. And then the rest of the time you can study whatever you want. Instead of, and this is the thing that I've seen a lot of people do that causes like burnout and quitting and all these things, is they apply for like 6 hours a day and they just research companies, write these huge CVs, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't get a job in 6 months, you've learned absolutely nothing. So for me, I was like, if I don't get a job, I'm going to learn I'm going to learn so many things that even though I didn't get a new job, within this time, I'd have learned a lot more things. So it didn't like go to waste. So that's the nice thing about this process is it's very fast. You can do it, an hour a day, an hour and a half, and then you can move on, do whatever you want after that. And so I'd strongly recommend it. Let me know how it goes. And if you have any questions, just write in the comments. And good luck for all you guys looking for new jobs.